Hi, kids. We are continuing on, bottom of page 33 in the whole Bible story, getting ready to talk about Joseph. Let me cue up my page here. Here we go, Joseph. Let me get the camera all set up. Hold on. Okay, Joseph. Jacob made Canaan his permanent home. His 12 sons shepherded his large flocks, but there was trouble in his family. Though Jacob was not his oldest, Jacob favored him. Oh, I totally said that sentence wrong. Though Joseph was not his oldest, Jacob favored him and gave him a beautiful robe, indicating that he intended to give Joseph most of the family's inheritance. Joseph's brothers resented this and despised Joseph. The relationship deteriorated even further when Joseph had two dreams revealing that his brothers and even his parents would bow to honor him. The brothers' hostilities exploded in violence when they were grazing their flocks in an isolated location. Jacob sent Joseph to check on them, but when he found them, they assaulted him and took his fancy robe. I mean, that sounds like brothers, right? They planned to kill him, but Reuben pleaded that they not do so. Instead, they sold him to merchants who were on their way to Egypt. Okay, that doesn't quite sound like brothers. They smeared Joseph's robe with goat blood and told their father that Joseph had been killed by a wild animal and that they produced his bloody robe as evidence. In Egypt, Potiphar, a military officer, bought Joseph to be his household slave. His wife tried repeatedly to seduce Joseph, but Joseph refused to sin because of his commitment to Potiphar and to God. In a last desperate attempt to seduce Joseph, she grabbed his cloak and said, "Let's have sex." Joseph ran from the house, leaving Potiphar's wife holding his cloak. Scorned, she accused him of rape and used his cloak as evidence. Sounds like Joseph's had a rough go of it. Instead of executing Joseph, Potiphar had put him into prison. Though his brothers had betrayed Joseph, God had not abandoned him. The Lord continued to speak to Joseph through dreams. Two other prisoners, one who had been Pharaoh's cupbearer and the other his baker, asked Joseph to interpret their dreams. Joseph told the cupbearer that he would be restored to his former position. The baker would be executed. He asked the cupbearer to remember how he had helped him, but the man seemed to have forgotten about Joseph when he was reinstated. Years later, the Lord worked providentially to fulfill his purpose for Joseph. Pharaoh the king had dreams his advisors could not interpret. Then Pharaoh's cupbearer remembered Joseph's ability to interpret dreams. He informed Pharaoh, who had ordered Joseph released, and asked him to interpret the dreams that had baffled his other advisors. Joseph gave the king good news and bad news. He told the ruler his dreams were prophetic about the future economic conditions in Egypt. Joseph predicted 7 years of prosperity, followed by 7 years of hardship. Pharaoh was impressed and made Joseph the second highest ruler in Egypt. As Joseph had predicted, Egypt enjoyed 7 years of abundant harvest and then suffered 7 years of devastating famine. During the prosperity, Joseph strategically stored grain for Pharaoh. When the famine struck, landowners were forced to sell their land to Pharaoh to survive. Pharaoh became extremely wealthy, Joseph very powerful. The famine was severe and widespread. It affected the land of Canaan, and Jacob's sons were forced to go to Egypt to buy grain. On their first visit, Joseph's brothers didn't recognize him, but he knew them and remembered his dreams that they would bow before him. Instead of identifying himself, Joseph accused them of spying on Egypt and imprisoned them. After 3 days, he released them, but said that to prove that they were not spies, they had to leave a hostage and bring their youngest brother back when they returned again. They left Simeon. Joseph ordered his servants to to give them grain and hide their money in the grain sacks. When they arrived in Canaan, they told Jacob an Egyptian ruler had imprisoned Simeon as a hostage and demanded that they return to Egypt with their youngest brother, Benjamin. Jacob refused. He had lost two sons, Joseph and now Simeon, and he didn't want to lose his only other son by Rachel. Because of the severity of the famine, Jacob, now called Israel, eventually was forced to send his sons back to Egypt, and he reluctantly agreed to let them take Benjamin after Judah promised that he would protect him. On their second trip, Joseph's brothers expected trouble, but were astonished at being treated like honored guests. Joseph tested them one more time before identifying himself. He wanted to find out if they would abandon Benjamin as they had abandoned him. He ordered a servant to secretly place a silver cup in Benjamin's grain sack. After they began their journey back to Canaan, Joseph sent his servant after them. He accused them of stealing and said the thief would become Joseph's slave. They denied the charge and agreed that if any of them were found to have the silver cup, he would become Joseph's slave. They were shocked when the cup was found with Benjamin. When Judah pleaded for mercy, Joseph could no longer control his emotions. He wept and said to his brothers, "I am Joseph." They were astounded and terrified. Joseph, however, assured them they had nothing to fear. He realized that though their intentions had been evil, God had sent him to Egypt to save their lives by making him an advisor to Pharaoh and ruler over the land. Joseph told them to return to Canaan and bring their father and their families to Egypt. When they returned and told their father that Joseph was alive and had become a powerful ruler, Israel didn't believe them. They were able to convince him by telling him what Joseph had said and showing him the provisions he had sent. Israel agreed to make the journey to Egypt. While on his way, the Lord confirmed to the patriarch that this was all a part of the plan to make Israel into a great nation. Joseph asked Pharaoh for permission to settle his family in the land of Goshen and assured the king that they were self-sufficient. After Israel, who was now 130, arrived in Egypt, Joseph introduced him to Pharaoh, and Israel blessed the king. Under Joseph's administration, the people of Egypt were able to survive the famine, but ultimately had to give their land to Pharaoh in exchange for food. The people became Pharaoh's servants, and he assumed responsibility for their care. Israel blessed Joseph's son, Ephraim and Manasseh, but elevated Ephraim over Manasseh, even though Manasseh, that's the best I can do, was the oldest. Israel also predicted what would happen in the future for each one of his sons, and he instructed them to bury him in the land promised to Abraham. When Israel died, Joseph honored his father's request and buried him in Canaan. Now that Israel was dead, Joseph's brothers expected him to take revenge, but instead he made a remarkable statement of faith. He declared, "Don't be afraid. I am in God's place." Nope, I messed that one up too. He said, "Don't be afraid. Am I in God's place?" Question mark. You intended evil, but God intended it for good, to accomplish the saving of many lives. Before he himself died, Joseph blessed his two sons, Ephraim and Manasseh, and made his brothers promise to take his remains back to the land that God had promised to Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob. We are now done with chapter 2. And chapter 3, let me give you a little teaser. We're going to talk about Moses and the Exodus. So we will see you next time, my lovelies. Good night.